So what do you think? Is democracy dead? Who better to ask that question to than the Honourable Brian Peckford, the last living First Minister to have signed our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, as well as the former Premier of Newfoundland. He was a keynote speaker on an event that Rebel News traveled to Victoria to cover called the Reclaiming Canada Conference. And here is my interview with him.
Is it possible in Canada today to restore our democracy? That's something that's been on my mind a lot in the last 2 or 3 months, because I'm getting pessimistic about that. And I'm not a pessimist. Churchill once said, "I'm an optimist. There's no use being anything else."
All right, the Honourable Brian Peckford, good to have you on Rebel News again.
Thank you. Real good to be with you.
Yes, you gave a good speech, and it was a serious topic that I think many people have on their mind. Is democracy too far gone? I'll start with asking you, what are some of the things that you think are so disheartening that you're looking at in Canada today?
Well, I mean, I see it all the way from the comments of the Chief Justice to the Prime Minister violating the conflict of interest legislation and still being able to sit in the House of Commons. We've got to do something to make our leaders more accountable. Mm-hmm. And therefore we need to amend the conflict of interest legislation so that if any MP violates the conflict of interest commissioner's adjudication or is found to be guilty in a court of law, they cannot sit in the House of Commons. A lawmaker cannot be a lawbreaker.
It seems simple, doesn't it?
To know that your elected leaders now have got to be on their guard about how they spend your money, number one. Number two, how they behave, because they could no longer be an MP if they're found to be unethical by the Ethics Commissioner or a court.
What else do you think the people could do for change?
I think the people could insist that all the political parties in Canada publish annual audited financial statements of those people who are part of the party and are giving money to these parties, know where their money is going. How is it being spent? We now have where the money comes from through the Election Act and through the Elections Commission, but we don't have a full audit financial statement of where it goes and how it is spent. And none of the parties right now have on their website anything to do with their financial statements. So that could change, and Canadians can do that tomorrow. You know, that's something we can do now. Mm-hmm. So that's the kind of stuff. Education, every school in Canada that gets money from the government should be mandated to teach a subject called civics in grade 8 and in every grade until they finish high school. So that would be at least 4 years of civics for them to understand how our country operates and know its history. Under the existing Constitution, what we can do now, today, tomorrow, next week, 2 weeks from now, 6 months from now, if we get together. If the people can get together and make these kinds of changes, both on sovereignty as well, Canada must remain a sovereign country, balanced budget legislation, these kinds of things, there's a chance of saving it. And of course, we've got to change the judiciary too, because the judiciary are not now adhering to the principles of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, especially the preamble, the supremacy of God and the rule of law. Some cases they've ignored it completely and not even addressed it in their decisions on the Charter. How can you address a decision on the Charter without talking about the framework in which the Charter is placed? How come God has become a dirty word? About a half year ago now, or a year ago, I wrote on my blog, has God become a dirty word in this country? This is where we are as a nation. And I'm not sure, when I look around my own municipality and people that I know who will still at least say hello to me, but not much more, I don't think they get it. I don't think they realize the depth to which our country has fallen democratically. To change it is going to take a huge, huge effort. You know, one day I'm optimistic, the next day I'm sort of pessimistic. But if we could come together as a people and agitate for these 6 changes that I outlined today, there is a chance that we could reclaim our country. But right now it's a 50-50 proposition.
It's a lot of work. Now,
it's a lot of work.
Last question. As someone who was involved, a minister signing for our Charters of Rights and Freedom, what do you make of Section 1, which at this point has been used to do things like lockdowns, separate people, treat them like lepers? What do you make of that?
I think what the courts have done, once again, is in the same way as with the preamble, they have abused those sections. Look, demonstrably justify in today's world means you must do some cost-benefit analysis. Not one of the governments in Canada even attempted to do cost-benefit analysis, nor did they follow the rule of law as we understand it. The pandemic is a really, 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 really good example. There should have been a parliamentary committee in every provincial legislature overseeing what the Department of Health and those silly public health officers were doing. That would be democracy. We declare we're a parliamentary democracy. How can we be a parliamentary democracy if we're willing to pass the power over to the health minister and then from the health minister to the public health officer who's not even elected? What's going on there? And all the MLAs just sitting around, MPs, listening to somebody else articulate what should be what they're articulating. The other thing is, also in Section 1, it talks about a free and democratic society. And none of the governments brought their parliaments into active participation in all of the mandates that happened. It should have been overseen by a parliamentary committee in all the provinces and in the federal government. We count upon our elected officials to be accountable to us. And then they pass the ball over to an unelected public health official. That's not free and democratic society. So they have violated the law in 3 ways in Section 1. And I think that kind of thing, if the people understood that and started to agitate to their MLAs and their MPs along those lines, you'd see a big change in how the governments brought in new powers and in how the judges began to judge.
Well, yeah, the courts would have to see it too, because so far, judges have not been ruling as though it was illegal. Thank you so much for your time and your words, and it's good to see you again.
Good to see you too. Thank you very much.
If you appreciate this report and all of our coverage of the Reclaiming Canada conference, please consider chipping in to cover our expenses to get here. We had to take a very expensive ferry. By we, I mean myself and Alex, who's behind the camera. We also had to get an Airbnb to stay here, and all of that is expenses that we rely and hope that you will help us cover. So if you'd like to chip in a few bucks to do so, please go to rebelfieldreports.com and chip in what you can. We appreciate your support.